for both the courses. Can I start? Yes. So it's a revision class for Introduction to Psychology. Again, if you have any doubts, please feel free to ask them first. Otherwise, we'll go through revision of 2 units, Intro to Psychology and Learning and Memory. Is that clear? पीछे पास कर दो. Okay. So Intro to Psychology, the first relevant thing is how to understand the conceptualization of history of how psychology came to be. Right? It was not an independent field for a very long time, much like other sciences. It started off with studies of implications of different illnesses in a vague setting under medical doctors. But the first breaking point of psychology in the Western world was when Wilhelm Wundt made his first laboratory in Germany, in Leipzig, I think in 1973, if I'm not wrong. 1873, sorry, not 1973 for sure. 1879. Okay. So 1879, Wilhelm Wundt opened his first laboratory where he started doing experiments, studies about understanding different human behaviors, which led to the start of this understanding of human behavior. Before that, it was done in a very vague settings, not independently as a field. That is why Wilhelm Wundt is called the father of psychology, because he was the first person to say it's not this, not that. I'm not trying to study biology, I'm not trying to study social consequences. I'm trying to study how a human brain processes information, right? Even then it took a while for the definition of psychology to even get refined to what it is today. What is the definition of psychology?
Psychology is a scientific study of human mind and behavior.
That's one of the most common definitions and very accurate one too. So that understanding came only much late. Girls in the back, what's going on? That definition came a bit later on, but in India, even before that, there had been an understanding of implications of trying to understand people's behavior. We did not have a school like psychology, but in what is now known as the Ayurveda, or probably which has been known Ayurveda for a while, we had understanding of different traits, the Vata, the Pitta or the Kapha. These were components which led to an understanding of what a human being's constitution is and how their behavior would be. So if you were someone with a high Vata, you might be, keep on settling in quickly, girls. So if you're someone with a high Vata, which means you'd be emotionally unstable, not unstable like you're erratic, but your emotions might be more fluid than another person. Someone with a Kapha had more intelligence to do with understanding of new concepts. Someone with a Pitta was more energetic and hands-on than being settled, right? So there were biological descriptions also. If you go back to the Ayurvedic texts, you will see there are a lot of biological
Sorry to cut you all in between, but कुछ important questions हैं, you all can note down.
You want to say it on the mic?
You can note down some of the important questions. How many of you are from BA program? ठीक है, मैं अभी generic question बता रही हूँ दोनों के लिए applicable है, honors और program दोनों के लिए, ठीक है? उसके बाद जो अलग specific है वो मैं बता दूँगी. Certain questions अगर मुझे एक SLM दे दो कोई? SLM पहले psychology की बात कर लेते हैं. अगर आप 20 marks के according अपना first unit में देखो, the questions could be explain the nature of psychology along with any 3 or 4 historical perspectives, right? 3 or 4 historical perspectives. Nature of psychology with some historical perspective. कई बारी specific स्पेसिफाई करके आएगा या कई बार हो सकता है स्पेसिफाइड ना हो. Another questions could be explain the subfield of psychology. Explain the various subfields of psychology. Explain the various subfields of psychology. If this kind of question comes, please make sure that you are elaborating on all the subfields, but beginning from what is psychology. ये implicit question एक तरह से है कि लिखना ही लिखना है. कुछ भी आएगा सवाल, अगर ये भी आता है explain the school of thoughts of psychology, जो कि आपका historical perspective ही है, right? तब भी शुरू आपने किससे करना है? What is psychology? Done? So ये third question था, explain the various schools of thought of psychology. और ये सब 20 मार्कर्स हैं. इसके अंदर आपका शॉर्ट नोट आ सकता है इंडियन पर्सपेक्टिव. शॉर्ट नोट ऑन इंडियन पर्सपेक्टिव. इंडियन पर्सपेक्टिव टुवर्ड्स साइकोलॉजी. योर यूनिट 2 लर्निंग इन मेमोरी. इसके अंदर दो या कह लो दोनों टॉपिक से अलग अलग लॉन्ग आंसर्स बनते हैं, राइट? सो लर्निंग के अलग बनते हैं दो और मेमोरी के ऐसे ही अलग. क्वेश्चन आ सकता है एक्सप्लेन द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ लर्निंग एंड इलैबोरेट ऑन एनी टू थ्योरीज. एक्सप्लेन द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ लर्निंग एंड इलैबोरेट ऑन एनी टू थ्योरीज. इसी के अंदर अगर आप ले लें कॉग्निटिव लर्निंग थ्योरी एंड ऑब्जर्वेशन लर्निंग थ्योरी, ये शॉर्ट नोट में भी आ सकती है अलग से, बिकॉज ये कंपैरेटिवली छोटी थ्योरीज हैं. कॉग्निटिव एंड ऑब्जर्वेशनल. Another short note option from this unit is forgetting. Forgetting. A long answer from this could be explain the concept of memory and elaborate on any two models. Or एक और ऑप्शन बता रहे हूँ, explain the concept of memory and elaborate on any two models. Or the option of this could be explain the ways or methods to enhance memory. ये एक अच्छा लंबा क्वेश्चन बनता है. जब ये भी क्वेश्चन आए, you have to first start writing what is memory. नहीं पूछा तब भी explain the various methods or ways to enhance memory या improve memory. Synonyms भी यूज कर सकते हैं, ठीक है? उसके बाद ऑनर्स वाले लिख ले पहले. Explain the various ways to improve memory. इससे पहले वाला models of memory या short note में आएगा तो forgetting के concept पे आ सकता है. Okay, for honors please take in note it. program का मैं next बता दूंगी. You have the topic of motivation and emotion. ठीक है? So what are the various types of emotions? What are the various types of emotions and relationship between motivation and emotion? What are the various types of emotions and relationship between motivation and emotion? Another could be motivation and emotion. Another one would be what is memory? What is memory? Sorry, what is motivation? Memory तो दूसरों के लिए. What is motivation? And explain the types. What is motivation and explain any types or detail में आप types explain कर सकते हैं of motivation. For emotions it could be explain any two theories of emotion. आपने चार पढ़ी है ना? कोई भी दो theories of emotion detail में पूछ सकता है. जितना डायग्रामेटिकली एक्सप्लेन कर सकते हो थ्योरीज को, इट्स बेटर. दिस इज फॉर बोथ ऑफ यू. मेमोरी है, मोटिवेशन है, इमोशन है, ये टॉपिक ऐसे इनमें डायग्राम्स अच्छे बनते हैं, राइट? व्हाट कम्स बिफोर इमोशन और कॉग्निशन, थॉट और फीलिंग. यू कैन इलैबोरेट इट विद द हेल्प ऑफ अ डायग्राम. ठीक है? आई एम नॉट सेइंग दिस बिकॉज़ इट टेक्स स्पेस. नो, आई एम सेइंग इट बिकॉज़ आपने लिखना ऐसे है, ये अज्यूम करके कि सामने वाले को कुछ नहीं आता साइकोलॉजी का, आपने सारा एक्सप्लेन करना है. in fundamentals to psychology. इसमें questions बनते हैं, what is personality? What is personality? Explain any 2 or 3 theories of personality. Two or three theories of personality. For intelligence, again, explain the concept of intelligence. Explain the concept of intelligence and any 2 or 3 theories of intelligence. Now for your short note, any one topic can come, any one theory can come separately also. सीधा लिख दिया कार्टर की थ्योरी एक्सप्लेन करो, राइट? या फिर उसमें सीधा लिख दिया कि आप पर्सनालिटी के अंदर कोई भी एक टाइप की पर्सनालिटी, मान लो फ्रॉइड की या कोई भी एक पर्सनालिटी को एक्सप्लेन करो, या टाइप्स ऑफ पर्सनालिटी आ गया, राइट? ये शॉर्ट नोट के क्वेश्चंस बन जाते हैं. नाउ कमिंग टू कॉग्निटिव. कैन आई हैव कॉग्निटिव की बुक? पहले दो टॉपिक्स अगेन दोनों के सेम है, इन विच योर टॉपिक्स आर एक्सप्लेन द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ कॉग्निटिव साइकोलॉजी. एक्सप्लेन द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ कॉग्निटिव साइकोलॉजी. आई एम सो सॉरी.
No.
Elaborate on the various methods of cognitive psychology. Elaborate on the various methods of cognitive psychology. फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन है, ये पूरा एक है. अब अगर इसमें भी कॉग्निटिव लिखा है, अगर मैं चेक कर रही हूँ तो आई वुड एक्सपेक्ट कि आप कॉग्निटिव साइकोलॉजी अगर शुरू कर रहे हैं तो पहले कॉग्निशन एक्सप्लेन कर रहे हैं, फिर साइकोलॉजी एक्सप्लेन कर रहे हैं, फिर कॉग्निटिव साइकोलॉजी एक्सप्लेन कर रहे हैं. दैट इज हाउ इट गोज, राइट? सबसे पहले अगर आप कॉग्निटिव साइकोलॉजी को एक्सप्लेन कर रहे हैं, फर्स्ट एक्सप्लेन कॉग्निशन. द क्वेश्चन, व्हाट आर द वेरियस मेथड्स ऑफ कॉग्निटिव साइकोलॉजी?
First explain cognition.
Right. For your short note, it could be explain the concept of culture and cognition. सब कुछ आपके SLM के अंदर है ऑलरेडी, इसके अलावा कुछ नहीं है. Another one could be explain the various ideas and key themes in the concept of cognitive psychology. Explain the various fundamental ideas and key themes.
मैम MPH में कौन लेगा क्लास? विद्युत मैम. अभी आए नहीं टीचर शायद. मैम आई नहीं है.
उसको कॉल करके करिए. Explain the various fundamental ideas and key themes in cognitive psychology. For unit 2, what is the nature of attention? What is the nature of attention? Elaborate on any 2 theories. कई बार थ्योरीज का नाम ही लिखा होगा, ठीक है, सीधा लिख दिया ब्रॉडबैंड थ्योरी एक्सप्लेन करो. दैट इज आल्सो पॉसिबल. सो ये ऑप्शन नहीं है, ये मेरे क्वेश्चन बताने का मतलब ये नहीं है हर जगह लिखा है एनी 2 to 3 थ्योरीज, तो सिर्फ उतनी पढ़ के जाओगे और बाकी छोड़ जाओगे, मत करना. समटाइम्स दे कैन स्पेसिफिकली आस्क दिस थ्योरी. यू डोंट हैव एनी स्कोप ऑफ लीविंग एनी यूनिट और एनी टॉपिक, राइट? हद से हद एक यूनिट, अगर बहुत टाइम क्रंच है, एक यूनिट का आधा पार्ट शायद छोड़ सकते हो. लाइक लर्निंग एंड मेमोरी में एक छोड़ दिया, दूसरा कर दिया, या एक पर्सनालिटी उसमें कर दिया, लेकिन अदरवाइज देयर इज नो नीड. ठीक है, बेटर इज सब पढ़ के जाओ, एटलीस्ट ऊपर ऊपर से ही सही. Another is explain the laws of perception. Explain the laws of perception. Explain the laws of perception and elaborate on different perceptual illusions. Elaborate on different perceptual illusions. In problem solving, third unit, problem solving, it could be
This is I think this illusion thing is specific for the
ऑनर्स
मैम कोर्स एंड टॉपिक क्या रहेगा मैम पूछती हैं
फंडामेंटल्स ऑफ साइकोलॉजी बोलो कॉग्निटिव करा दिए साइकोलॉजी का रिवीजन ही तो है
कॉग्निटिव साइकोलॉजी फंडामेंटल
किसमें
जो illusions थी वो एक ही वर्कबुक में थी दोनों में से.
इल्यूजन्स प्रोग्राम की बुक में अगर नहीं है सो यू कैन लीव दैट ओनली फोकस ऑन व्हाट इज इन योर बुक
I
प्रोग्राम
think program में है उसमें नहीं है.
ऑनर्स में नहीं
Honors में नहीं है.
ऑनर्स में इल्यूजन्स नहीं है लेकिन आई थिंक ऑनर्स में उन्होंने ना परसेप्शन के लॉज में आगे
Consistencies है. हाँ.
कंसिस्टेंसी है तो वही लिखना है राइट
मैम कॉग्निटिव और फंडामेंटल अलग अलग टॉपिक
उसको बोलो इंट्रोडक्शन टू साइकोलॉजी स्लैश फंडामेंटल साइकोलॉजी राइट तो डिफरेंट परसेप्शन ऑफ कंसिस्टेंसी आ जाएगा वहां पर ठीक है शॉर्ट नोट में आ सकता है अटेंशन की बात कर रही हूँ अभी कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ डाइवर्जेंट सिलेक्टेड अटेंशन कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ सिलेक्टेड अटेंशन या फिर डिटर्मिनेंट्स ऑफ अटेंशन दोनों शॉर्ट नोट के क्वेश्चंस हैं डिटर्मिनेंट्स ऑफ अटेंशन सिलेक्टिव अटेंशन डिवाइडेड अटेंशन ये तीनों गुड शॉर्ट नोट क्वेश्चंस divided selective and divergent determinants of attention प्रोग्राम में शायद रेट्रोग्रेड अमनेशिया भी है वो भी आ सकता है रेट्रोग्रेड अमनेशिया ठीक है इन शॉर्ट नोट नाउ कमिंग टू ऑनर्स Honors में you have thinking, problem solving, decision making. In program you have problem solving and creativity. So problem solving के लिए पहले बता देती हूँ. Explain the process and method of problem solving. Explain the process and method of problem solving. ठीक है? Another question for problem solving. Explain the various barriers towards problem solving. Explain the various barriers towards problem solving. For honors now, नहीं वो कंबाइन था अब मैं अलग बता रही हूँ वो दोनों कंबाइन थे जो अब तक देखो तुम्हारा जो टॉपिक है प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग वो दोनों में है राइट अपॉलॉजीज फॉर ऑल द कंफ्यूजन बिकॉज तुम दोनों साथ में बैठे होते हो और अभी इसीलिए बिकॉज एज पर द स्ट्रेंथ वी आर गोइंग अहेड राइट एंड आपकी टॉपिक्स आइडली सेम है सो अभी तक जो मैंने बताया प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग इज इन बोथ ऑनर्स एंड प्रोग्राम नाउ आई एम टेलिंग यू फॉर द स्पेसिफिक टॉपिक्स व्हिच आर डिफरेंट इन द टू फॉर ऑनर्स एक्सप्लेन द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ थिंकिंग explain the concept of thinking and relationship between cognition and thinking a short note could be explain the various stages of decision making or it could be explain the barriers to decision making another question
मैम हम शॉर्ट नोट में फ्लो चार्ट्स बना सकते हैं
सब कुछ बना सकते हो ब्लू पेन से लिखना ब्लैक से मत लिखना एक और क्वेश्चन लॉन्ग आंसर के लिए What is the relationship between language and thought? ये था for honors. Now coming to the topics remaining of program. Creativity के लिए how does creativity and problem solving are related to each other? How is creativity and problem solving related to each other? plays the ways to enhance or foster creativity. ठीक है, ये तो दो मेन थे. बायोसाइकोलॉजी की मैं अभी यहाँ नहीं बता रही क्योंकि प्रोग्राम के भी बच्चे हैं, इट विल गेट कंफ्यूजिंग. राइट, क्लियर यहाँ तक? थैंक यू. Otherwise I'll put it on the team. या तो मैं टीम्स पे डाल दूंगी, नहीं तो मैं नेक्स्ट क्लास में बता दूंगी जब सुबह पहली अलग क्लास होगी. राइट,
Just an additional tip to writing your exams is that think of it that you have to write an essay on the topic. You know, it should be very wholesome. It should have an introduction of, even if they're just asking what are some theories of problem solving, just write an introduction of one paragraph, 3-4 lines of what is problem solving, what is its relevance. Then go into theories and then conclude with a conclusion or a, if possible, a critique of a theory if you're sharing it. Because when we are doing psychology, we are not trying to see if you remember one word over the other. We are trying to see if you have formulated the concept clearly in your head, right? So just make sure you're not just answering very to the point. Maybe giving a little bit of an introduction and a conclusion is a good idea to give a more wholesome look to it. And also, like ma'am was saying, just time how much you're writing, because I don't know if because it's your first time, when it was my first time, I was very bad at time management, right? Sometimes the question is so big, you might have 8 pages worth of content. But if you end up writing that, you don't see how your exam suffers, right? So just make sure you're writing 3 to 4 pages is minimum. You can obviously extend if you can. Like I know a lot of people who would have extended further than that also. But just make sure you're covering everything. You're not being very brief, not being too elaborate, so that rest of your paper does not suffer, because a lot of time will go into writing. You know, every answer will take a lot of your time. Yeah.
Just a question about, what would be the length of, what approximately length of a long answer or a short answer?
So long answer would be 3 to 4 sides minimum. But depending on the topic, let's say you have given a big flow chart, you might want to elaborate it further. You could go a little bit, exceed by a couple of sides more, that's okay. So somewhere starting from 3 to 4, you could go to 5, 6 if needed for a specific answer. Again, having an introduction, a conclusion is more important in the long answer, because you're explaining a whole concept to a person who doesn't know. That's how you have to write it. For a short note, 2 sides is enough. 2 sides should be a good deal, or 1.5 to 2 sides is okay. But yeah, if possible, add diagrams. If very important is to make some headings and give it a clear visual, because if you just write 4 pages of whatever you remember, the person will be very, chaotic, and it will be a chaotic understanding of your concept. So try to have diagrams, points clearly mentioned ahead of time. Yeah, and definitely time your answers. Like I would say, let's say it takes half an hour for one answer, and there are 5 questions. So half an hour for one answer. Imagine how much writing you have to do in one question, right? So half an hour per answer, and half an hour you can keep for revision. So that's how I would have given my exams. I'll take 35 maximum minutes for one question. If it's 35, I'll stop and go to the next one, right? And then last half an hour you'll need for revision, making some, underlining, correcting some diagrams or things like that. So that's how I would suggest you go about it. Okay, shall we continue?
Yes, ma'am.
Any more exam-related questions? Can everyone stop chatting in the back? On the right, please. Guys, if you have a question, you can ask me. So the Indian perspective talks about the Vata Pitta Kapha, which is an Ayurvedic theory of health. In India, the understanding of implications of health on the mind was rooted in the very beginning of Ayurveda as well. Right? So it's not like Vata Pitta Kapha is a mental health theory. It's a theory of health. It's an Ayurvedic theory on which medicines are given till date. Right? But it also had a component of how it would impact your mental health. What signs show stronger in one composition over the other. Right? So if your kapha is increased, it might suggest that you have more sedimentary lifestyle. You might gain weight. You might become lazy, lethargic. But it also will have an implication on your mental health, of course, right? So all the 3, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, are Ayurvedic understanding of what we now know as traits or types of personality, and their variation would change in your life. It's not like it's a fixed, it's not a personality theory, but it's, you may have an inclination to one towards the other. So if you eat a certain kind of food, Ayurveda would say your personality could, your Vata Pitta Kapha balance could change, right? That's the first context in which it was heard. It's also very relevant in spiritual texts of Buddhism, of Vedas, of Upanishads, where there has been a lot of discourse around understanding what we call as enlightenment, self-realization, but it also has a component of reflecting on your behavior, right? You'll see from ages there have been conversations of this is how Buddha was, he was this calm, he was this balanced. This is also about a sense of control over your mental function, right? So there have been discussions around it in contexts which were different in India, in Indian context, be it spiritual context of self-realization, which later Maslow also adapted in motivation and called it self-actualization, be it the Ayurvedic system of Vata, Pitta, Kapha, or be it the yogic science. So in the yogic system, there are 8 limbs. So there are many ways, many kinds of yoga as well. This is particularly Ashtanga yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga given by Patanjali, who was the founder of yoga, right? So he said there are 8 stages of being, of having a sense of control over your body and mind. So in its own way, it was a theoretical model of how to manage your system, right? You can say it's an intervention, right? So it starts with yam. Yam is basic understanding of sanitation and hygiene. So, restraining from too much of something. Then is niyam. Niyam is rules, right? So niyam would require you to get up at the same time every day, be conscientious, work for what you work towards. Asana is maintaining a sense of posture in your body. Then there is pranayam, controlling your breath. So you'll see from going from very physical to very emotional. It goes from emotional to then control of understanding. So pranayam is controlling your breath to control your emotions, to be in a balanced state. You'll see if people talk about pranayam, they're also doing it for the sense of, breathing exercises are often considered a way of balancing your emotional systems. Then there is pratyahara, which means withdrawal from senses. So sensory things do not have enticing effect on you, right? If you look at a nice food platter, but you know it's not good for you, you will not have it, right? This is a simplistic understanding of pratyahara, but pratyahara means your sensation should not impact your mental health, your state of your mind actually, not even, it doesn't talk about mental health. So even if you'll have stories of yogis who had like a rat eating their leg away and they were just simply sitting in dhyana because they have crossed pratyahara, they're not getting influenced by their sensation, right? This is a stage where you withdraw from sensations, you go to the inside world where you're reflecting on yourself. Then there is dharana, which is concentration. So you're going inside, but what if inside is chaotic? Then you have to focus on one thing. So yogis would just focus on one object, one idol, or on their breath, or on an object, or a stone. People have stories of focusing on even a piece of black stone.
Can it be a thought also?
Focusing on a thought? I've not heard of such a thing, to be honest. But it could be, theoretically, it can be focusing on anything. The only thing is thought is very fragile. It will come and go. So you will not be able to focus on it fully. But people have focused on words. I don't know if you'll call that a thought, like basically chanting. Right? So I think every religion has a component of chanting. So chanting is what? Focusing on that sound or that word. If you can call that a thought, yes. Or even manifesting, as the Gen Z calls it, is what? Focusing on one thought again and again, trying to bring yourself to it. But Patanjali says these things go in a cycle. You can't just directly go to pratyahara. You have to go through yam, niyam, asana, pranayam to go to pratyahara. Whereas different other ways have looked at it differently, and they've said it's probably not as sequential as this. You were saying something?
I think what I was able to understand is that when we are focusing on a thought, it's imagination that we are, one specific thought that we are focusing and manifesting. That's the way.
Something like manifestation. It's not mentioned in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, at least the ones that I have read. He doesn't talk about focusing on a thought. He talks about more physical things, like it could be a breath, or it could be a sound, or it could be an object. But probably it can work on thought. Like, I have just not read about it to know enough, but possible. So dharana is concentration, and then there is dhyana. So dhyana is leaving that object of attention. So you're able to chant without actually chanting. Your concentration does not need an object. And then you go into samadhi where everything disappears and you are, I don't know what, free from everything, I guess, right? So these are the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga given by Pitanjali. There are many different other ways of looking at yoga as well, especially today. There's dog yoga also, there is acrobatic yoga also. But we are talking about the more ancient context because we are trying to understand where psychological understanding came from. You'll see a lot of this, like breathing exercises has so much relevance in positive psychology. Dharana, concentration has relevance in other learning-based forms of psychology. Self-actualization or these stages, the triangle model that you have of Abraham Maslow was given when he came to India. It was given after his trip to India. Even Jung, one of the leading minds in psychodynamics, came to India and took inspiration from Upanishads. He's said to have read Mandukya Upanishad and stuff like that. Right? So these sources have been the historical roots of an understanding of human mind, but they're not were not termed as an independent field of science back then. That then it was just health or it was just spirituality. Right? So it was either a form of transcendence or a form of understanding your health, but they gave roots to an understanding much before psychologists even got to an understanding of mind. Right? So it's a very ancient form of understanding which has been rooted in largely these few texts like Vedas. Ayurveda is also part of the Veda, right? So the health covers there. Upanishads is again part of some of the Vedas only, and the spiritual text of Buddhism or let me just see if you've talked about this. Yeah, so there is also a relevance. I mean, I don't know if it's there in both books, but they also talk about the devotional based aspects, right? So a lot of religion texts like of Sikhism, Islam, Christianity, Kabir, Jain, Jain literature, they also focus on understanding how your emotions can help you transcend everything around you. So this is more physical. Those things are more emotion oriented or more devotion oriented, where you're chanting, you're ecstatic, or there is, for example, the Kabir Dohas you might have studied in school. You would have studied the more basic ones probably in CBSE, but there are ones which really help you understand how people are, how life is, how to be motivated. They talk about everything and they'll just set it in form of poetry for people to just chant along and understand. So these things were more massy and circulated orally, whereas things like Vedas and Upanishads were more literature oriented, so they were written down and transferred from generation to generation. So point being, there has been an implication in the East of understanding of psychology, but in context of other things, and later on we can take it forward to make meaning of it in psychological sense. So now within psychology there is pure and applied psychology. Psychology can be broken down into many units, right? You'll see even today in Delhi itself you'll have a source, you'll have somewhere to learn child psychology, criminal psychology, education psychology, sports psychology, and there are proper courses for all of these things, right? Not just a random course, a degree available for most of these variables, applied psychology, clinical, counseling, organizational, right? So all of these are relevant because how a human being is will influence everything that he does, right? For a sportsman, it will influence their game. For a person going through an illness, it will influence their, psychopathology is very obviously a concern for every psychologist, but that's not where it ends anymore, you know. There are even education psychologists designing syllabus, just making sure that the syllabus converts into right values and thinking patterns for students, right? So they're reviewing syllabus of different subjects just to see how it will impact the mental health of a child going through that form of education. So the pure psychology has components of general psychology, which we are studying most of these courses. Abnormal psychology would mean mental health disorders, which is largely everything that comes under the diagnostic manual of illnesses given by APA, the DSM-5, I think 5 is the latest one, yeah. The social psychology is an understanding of how people interact in groups, right? How I am as an individual would be more understanding of my personality, my intelligence, But social psychology is very experimental in nature and has a lot of observations happening as well. So seeing, for example, people in a mob will be ready to kill someone who will not be ready, who will not probably do that as an individual. So what is the mob mentality? Or studying how, for example, there's a very interesting social psychology study where there were a lot of prop people's like actors, paid actors, made to sit as exam participants, and it was very simple questions were being asked, like what is 3 plus 4? Okay, not that simple, maybe, but simple questions, right? And all the actors gave the wrong answer. And the participant, they also in the compulsion that even though they were sure that 3 plus 4 is 7, everyone was saying 9, so they also said 9, right? So just to see how a group can influence your thinking. Things like these are studied in social psychology. So it's a very interesting experimental way of understanding how being part of a group influences your mindset. How there is minority majority thinking, how there is in-group out-group feeling, how there is a different sense of perception when you're part of a like-minded group, or if you're assimilating into a new culture. So many different components of how your society influences your thinking. Experimental psychology can have its roots in different other forms, but it's basically a research-based approach to study how people put into different conditions can help us understand different factors about human behavior. Parapsychology, physiological psychology, and geopsychology, these are all basic understandings of like how you will respond to your location, to your biological function and stuff like that. Applied psychology is more oriented towards your professional endeavors. So educational psychology, like I said, would be probably designing a syllabus or understanding learning disabilities, understanding how thinking can be, like you just learn thinking and problem solving, right? So how it can be implied to allow education to prosper for students. Clinical psychology, again, similar, is an implication of abnormal psychology. So understanding of what we know about diseases, using it to help people get out of those conditions or helping them manage their conditions. Legal psychology is understanding the legalities of implications. For example, someone is going through domestic abuse, so supporting them. Someone comes in with a pathological condition and they are harming someone. So psychologists have a role to play on giving a certificate of mental illness, wellness to the person, because it has relevance on a lot of legal decisions. For example, if the custody of a child is to be given, one of the parents is schizophrenic, they will not be able to take care of the child in a proper manner and the child could suffer significantly. So a psychologist is needed to analyze the condition of the parent. Even like schizophrenia is a big deal, but just to analyze if they're stable enough to provide for their child regularly, are they emotionally, financially independent to support the child. Things like these are often included in family court or even in criminal cases where people will try to say that give reasons for their mental health condition as a possible cause of the actions that they committed. Military psychology, again, used for testing, used for if you heard of the SSB exam, right? So SSB is a qualifying exam to get into military-related services, or even the NDA. They all have a lot of components of testing your mental rigor, because if you're fighting in the front and you're anxious, you will probably lose your life or even cause someone else their life. So they test a lot of people's rigor, their team building activity, their leadership strengths, and they have constant checks in military to ensure that these things are building forward as you're being sent to report for duty for roles like these, which are very highly intensive and not regular for a person like you and me. Criminal psychology, understanding how different people respond, how different criminals have a certain mindset and why they're doing what they're doing. For example, there are studies happening in Bihar jail in India almost consistently. There are studies, for example, on what were the rapists really thinking when they did it, because we want to understand that to have implications in the society to make changes so it doesn't happen, right? So that's largely the role of criminal psychology. There's a very interesting study by a woman who interviewed 700 rapists in Bihar jail, and she tried to find out what was going on in their head as they committed such a heinous act. So things like these come under criminal psychology, where they're understanding criminal mindsets. There also might be more simple in terms of understanding felonies and things like that. Also can be as complicated as understanding a serial killer or very exciting but dangerous stuff. There's mental psychology and political psychology again, and political psychology would be more like image formation, how to speak to people, how to connect with them. So these are consultants that politicians would hire to help them connect with their audience better, or even to influence them sometimes, oftentimes. The important thing is the perspectives or the approaches in psychology. This is a very important topic from exam point of view, because as you go forward, you will see everything fits in these boxes. You know, it's one or the other boxes, every other subject will fit. So a biological perspective understands the human body function and its implications. So like what you studied in biopsychology, how the brain, body, endocrine system is, how it is influencing how you think, how you feel, how you react, all those kind of things. Behavioral perspective is more an understanding of your actions, which you have learned in the learning and the memory, where you learned the Skinner experiment or the Pavlov dog experiment, right? So all these experiments were the source of behavioral understanding. This is a school on which cognitive behavioral therapy is also formed. It is essentially saying that your behavior is a learned response, and you can unlearn and learn a new response, right? So there is a, and if you guys have seen, but there's a fun video of how Skinner taught a pigeon how to operate a missile to launch correctly. So they were able to train animals into very interesting and fascinating ways. It's not very commonly done now because one, it did everything that it had to do, and two, because there were a lot of ethical foundations to what was being done. So it's largely, it was an animal research-based science. The pioneers were Skinner and Pavlov, who studied a lot of animal behavior which had implications on human behavior. Like the monkey study that I was talking about, it has implication on human beings as well, right? It's a mammalian thought to seek comfort in time of danger, not someone who provides for you, right? You might want to go into more details. I'm just overviewing it, but it talks about like the positive, the conditioning, the punishments, the positive and negative reinforcement, things like these. You probably would mention if it's an elaborate question on this. Psychodynamic is the most commonly known, I guess, component of psychology. Freud has popularized it very significantly. So psychodynamics says that everything that you're going through right now is a consequence of your past, saying that your childhood influenced who you are today, right? It doesn't talk about biology, it doesn't talk about learning behavior. It says your response today is a response of what happened to you when you were younger. You may or may not remember it. So it talks a lot about unconscious memories that you have trapped in your brain. It has that iceberg model, which you may, I mean, it's not needed for your answers in this context. You'll probably study it later in the course, but it talks about the unconscious brain. So it has three main points. One, the unconscious, conscious, preconscious brain. Two, it talks about the things being buried in your childhood and having an influence in your life today. It is very applicable. It's a very utilitarian approach for clinical psychologists and counseling psychologists. And three, it talks about the id, ego, and superego. So it is the child in you, which wants immediate gratification. So for example, I want this food right now. Is this id need of me? An ego need would be, oh, right now I'm going through a class, I'll eat after the class, right? A superego would be a very moralistic standpoint that, you know, the right thing to do is this, the wrong thing to do is this. So id, ego, and superego are three layers of our consciousness which develop as we age, and they exist in all of us. So yeah, I don't think I need to get too invested in this. It's my favorite school of thought, so I can go on and on about it. But there have been many relevant people after Freud also, like Erik Erikson, Karen Horney, and you have more? Alfred Adler, Jung. These are all psychodynamic people who have given very significant contributions. For example, Erik Erikson talked about how your birth order influences who you are. So an older sibling usually has a similar personality to another older sibling, whereas a younger child has a similar personality. They've talked about how as you age, you go through different transitions of what is that you're going through as a conflict in that age. So you go from, let's say, identity formation to role in the age of your teenage, and then you go to learn intimacy in versus isolation in a later age. So there are all these models that are derived from these three base points, which further explain a lot of behavioral understanding of human beings. It was very, very relevant for a big chunk of the 19th century. Now probably it's lost its relevance as much because it's very extensive. It takes a lot of years of training to become a psychoanalyst. Cognitive perspective we've already studied. It talks about cognition, thinking patterns, problem solving, creativity, all these subunits, essentially saying we're understanding the function of the brain. We're not interested, cognitive psychologists were not interested in all this work that Freud and his contemporaries were doing. They cared about what's happening now. They don't want to go back to your childhood. It's too extensive. There's not a clear methodology. So they want to focus, Abhi, you're doing this, we can fix it like this. We can make it better. So the behavioral and cognitive got combined to form the cognitive behavioral therapy, which is today the most powerful, most popular form of therapy. The evolutionary approach talks about how you have gained certain behaviors as part of your evolution. For example, you might want to stick around people who look like you, because it gives you a sense of safety, right? Because if you were human beings, you probably not want to hang out with wolves, right? Or for example, why men would have objectified women probably historically was because they they wanted to choose a mate who could carry their baby, right? So things like these, they study how different things from the early man times have influenced the society today. They may not be relevant now, but they have an implication of how behaviors could have been formed and so how we can unlearn them. That's about, yeah?
Ma'am, can you tell me the difference between behavioral and cognitive perspective?
Yeah. Behavioral perspective was largely very animalistic study. That's one animal-based study. So it did a lot of experiments to do with animals. And it was a lot about teaching and unlearning. Whereas cognitive also tries to understand how that learning happens for you. For example, in behavioral, you'll study more about operant conditioning, classical conditioning. So it's like, oh, this is how I learn. But what is going on inside your head when you're doing that behavior is what cognition is interested in. The humanistic perspective, largely headed by Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, talks about how it's a person-centered therapeutic approach. It is when you focus on helping people get to their best level of self. Right? So as you see, as we transition from one to the other, they also show how society has evolved. Right? First, we wanted to know about childhood, but then we did that and we wanted to know what's happening today. Now we were able to manage the today with CBT, but then we wanted to expand and feel fulfilled in our lives, which is where humanistic approach comes in. So humanistic approach talks about, the Rogers model essentially says, it helps you bring closer to your ideal self. For example, if I think who I am is a really non-intelligent person who's suffering or can't speak to public, whereas who I am is a capable being, if I bridge the gap, I'll be more peaceful. Right? I understand who I am, what my capabilities are. If I have a very inflated idea of myself, that I'm amazing, people around me are silly and they don't know what to do, then also I'll suffer. Bringing it closer to a realistic understanding of who I am will be better. This is a Rogerian approach of understanding humanistic psychology, essentially saying helping people achieve their best selves. It's not a problem-solving approach. It's not simply just a problem-solving approach. It also helps people feel fulfillment and excitement and not just survival. It also has Maslow's need triangle. You've studied that, right? Motivation, I think. You all have motivation. True? So in motivation, you would have studied Maslow's hierarchy. So that was the first basis of humanists. Maslow was not really like a practicing psychologist. He just made the theory. So based on this, Roger and other people made theories which today are relevant. There are also further theories like Gestalt and existential school that came much later on, but humanist was the last major school, after which there have been a few more schools actually, but these were the most relevant in historically. The others like existential and Gestalt are pretty recent. They are in the late 19th century. So for us, probably it's still we are figuring out ways to administer and see their utility. So the subfields of psychology are, I'll not repeat the things that we have already done. Forensic is similar to criminology. Clinical comparative we have already done. Counseling and clinical are different because counseling is more low intensity. Clinical is more for people who are either hospitalized or are on medication and cannot function, whereas counseling psychology is more therapy for people who are going through a distress in their life or a trauma or a grief, but are still able to function without medicine or hospitalization. So clinical is more intensive and requires specific training of going through an MPhil degree in India, whereas counseling is more low intensity therapy. Developmental psychology is understanding how as a child grows, what are the stages of development that they grow through, when they learn, what they learn, how they learn, and how it influences their personality. Environmental psychology influences how, like if you raise someone with no exposure to trees or natural elements or water, I mean water you'll have to expose to, but like not rivers or ocean, how that person might grow differently from a person who's exposed to all of that natural element. It acts as a grounding system, it gives them certain support. So all of the influence of your environment where you are raised to who you are. Health psychology is fairly simple. Organizational psychology is when you are understanding how in an organization different components come together. So it may involve something like creating a test for hiring people, to ensuring there are no conflicts in a group, to ensuring there's good team building, good leadership strategies, the organization structure is supportive for your goal. So just understanding different parts of organization, training and training needs, things like that for building a better future. I think that sums up the first unit. We don't have a lot of time to go to the second unit, but I'll just remind you that there's an attendance sheet for both courses somewhere, and the attendance sheet for BA program for the first class is here. So if you were not able to fill in your attendance for the first class BA program, please fill it here. Rest, the attendance sheets are somewhere. Thank you so much. Yeah, you can use it, but probably in writing, I wouldn't recommend. In an exam, I won't recommend it. Yeah. Thank you.